3D. Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How you doing today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. It's been really nice. Well, it's been really swelteringly hot, but I like that. So I've been really enjoying it outdoors when I get outdoors. And I watched for the first time, Bruce. I watched a little bit of hockey last night. I haven't
Oh
watched
yeah.
since the Oilers went out. I've had no desire at all to watch hockey. Watched a couple of good movies. I watched this movie called The Gentleman. Have you seen that one? Guy Ritchie.
I have not.
It's on Netflix. Anyway, so I watched a bit of the Chicago Blackhawks Vegas game, and I saw Vegas score 2 goals to get back in the game, which they eventually won. And Jonathan Toews was at fault on both of them, as far as I could, from my own read of it. He didn't cover down. He was puck watching, didn't cover the guy in the front of the net, and then he got caught up ice when he could have been helping out on a 3-on-2, and reminded me very much of the McDavid-Draisaitl faux pas. So even the best of them, Jonathan Toews, Captain Serious, who has the reputation of being the best defensive player in the world, the best defensive center in the world.
Selke Trophy winner.
Man, he was just totally, I don't know. It's interesting. Just hockey happens so fast. And players get tired out there. They make you make one wrong decision, and you just lack that spark of energy in the key moment. And the Selke Trophy winner can look terrible on defense and cause absolutely critical goals against. So, anyway, Bruce, we're going to talk about. Sorry for that little
No problem.
brief.
Glad to hear you're watching hockey again, David.
Yeah, we're going to talk. I've been evaluating the Oilers, of course, nonstop,
Yes.
which is my focus always, and I'm a one-guy team. We're going to talk today about Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen, who are big in the news because as people process, I think the Oiler fandom has been processing what went wrong, and they've cast about, and I think Bruce, I think people are, maybe this is just me, but I think, okay, I am focused now on a couple areas. I think the defense being too slow and the lack of team defense to support them in the playoffs was a big issue. I think that the goaltending was a big issue. And I think that Ken Holland has got to address both of those things, as well as someone to play with McDavid. But that may be solved internally, the McDavid thing. I'm not sure about that. The goaltending thing, Bruce, is I think actually where Holland and on defense, that's where he's going to have to be more aggressive. And so there was a number of posts on this today. Mark Spector wrote about it. I wrote about it. And Mark Spector, they're digging into whether Ken Holland is going to keep Smith and Koskinen next year. So what did he write on this, Bruce? What was kind of the nut graph, the main point that was made in Spector's column?
Just that Holland, I guess, is still evaluating. I mean, he asked him about should he court Mike Smith or should he look elsewhere? And Holland's quote, this is from last week's presser, we're pretty much at the end of April in a normal season, meaning we're at a point where we've been knocked out of the playoffs, but the playoffs are ongoing. And he says, it's that time where if you're not in the playoffs, you're down watching your American League team when you're over to the U18s or the Men's World Championships. And of course, none of those things are happening in August. In fact, all of them got canceled this year. So he's Holland's in a strange space where not only is his team out of the playoffs, but there's nothing else to do but evaluate. Yeah. And one suspects that much of the evaluating is being done by watching the NHL goalies that are playing right in his own backyard. In the playoffs, and not only watching them, but also looking on the bench on those teams and seeing the guys who aren't playing, who maybe in a different situation would get a chance, and this has long been certainly the Oilers' MO and many teams to find a backup from another team. I mean, we can go back to Tommy Salo to find a backup from another team that wound up being the number one man in Edmonton, or
Bill
Dwayne
Ranford.
Rolison. Bill Ranford, yeah, sure. Dwayne Rolison, or certainly Cam Talbot, and a couple of lesser successful examples like Ben Scrivens and Victor Fast. what the rationale was always the same. Let's find a guy that's playing 25 games somewhere, has got some, promising stats, and let's get him on the cheap and see how he does as a number one. Well, in Edmonton, they're more looking for a 1A than a 1. I think Koskinen, between his contract and his performance, I don't think he's the guy they move on from. But I think Mike Smith, his chances of sticking around took a massive hit in a season where he posted in his official stats in the playoffs an 11.31 goals
This is
against
not fair,
average
Bruce. This is
and
not
a
fair.
.783 save percentage. Well, let's just say he got his chance and he didn't do the job. And unfortunately, in my view, Coach Tippett kind of messed up the rotation a little bit
He did.
because normally you would go back to after Koskinen lost Game 3, you go back to the other starter in Game 4. But that's where the best of 5. Because a best of 7 would have sort of given each goalie 2 chances to lose a game before you're out. Whereas in the best of 5, they were already down to their last life by the time each goalie had lost once. And he picked Koskinen for Game 5 or 4, and Koskinen didn't really come through either, which is why people are up in arms about the goaltending. I mean, they got smoked for 16 goals on, not that many shots that Chicago had outside of Game 1.
I wonder how many goalies, Bruce, are kind of the supernova goalie who come out like Grant Fuhr, Carey Price, right from junior or right from maybe a year in the AHL, Carter Hart, and then seize the job. And how many are more in that category of backup for a year or two and then seize the job? If you looked at all the starting goalies, I might actually do that, because it certainly has been a trend with the Oilers. We've had we tried it with Dubnyk and
Right.
coming out and developing them on our own, and that is a path for goalies. But I'm not sure that the drafting and developing of goalies is the way that most NHL teams find their starting goalie, or the optimum way. It is draft and development is the optimum for every other position. Obviously, no, hands down. I'm not sure that's the case with goalie. And it's Kent Holland. It's very sensible answer, I thought, to Spector.
Mm-hmm.
He's thinking about it. But we did a fan poll, Bruce, and fans are a little bit ahead of Kent Holland on this one. Perhaps not surprisingly. We had 2,600 people vote. And the question was, what should the Oilers do in goal? And option A, stick with Koskinen and Smith. So status quo. Only 7% of the fans want the status quo. Very, very small number of people who believe that the Oilers should stick with the status quo and that Elvis lives. In the other category, we had keep Koskinen, not Smith. Keep Mikko Koskinen, get rid of Smith. 64%. So that's by far, and this is informed by realism, right? Koskinen partly. It's not just preference. Most fans realize Koskinen has a 2-year deal, $4.5 million. Highly unlikely you could move him to another team for that length of time, even though he had a .917 save percentage this year, which is really good. But it'd be pretty hard, I think, to move Koskinen. I don't know. I haven't looked at how many teams are in the hunt for a starting goalie, but that's pretty pricey, even for a goalie with the save percentage that high. Okay, keep Mike Smith, move Koskinen. The least popular option, Bruce, 4.3%. Want to keep Mike Smith over Koskinen. Hardly anybody. And then the last option is get 2 new guys if possible. And 24% of the fans wanted that. So I'm definitely with the majority group myself in the keep Koskinen, not Smith camp. Mike Smith has had 2 years of subpar save percentages in the regular season. Now, people who, if you want to apologize for him, you could say, well, he's had a couple bad slumps those years. But listen, every player has slumps. And we rate them all on their average performance over time. Save percentage is it's probably the best way that we have, imperfect, but if you're back of the envelope, take on goalies, save percentage is fairly indicative of their play, especially save percentage compared to the other goalies on their own team. And Koskinen's save percentage was a lot better than Smith's this year. And I thought Koskinen outplayed Smith. this year, and he's 38, 2 subpar seasons in a row. I thought the bet was a coin flip on Mike Smith this year. Maybe heads he's going to play well most of the time. Tails he's going to flop. And I think they won the bet this year. It's even a more iffy bet this year, Bruce. And for me, the deciding factor is this: you're not looking for a backup goalie with the Oilers. You need a goalie who can come in and challenge Mikko Koskinen, who's still a question mark, for the top spot and play 40 or 50 games. That's what you have to find in this position. And I don't think Mike Smith's a good bet for that. So I'm saying, like, if we're going to do keep, hold, or fold on Mike Smith, I love his fire. I love his energy. I love what he brought to the team. I even liked his puck moving, as erratic as it could be at times. But I'm definitely in the fold camp with a 38-year-old goaltender who has had 2 subpar seasons in a row and failed in the playoffs. What about you?
Yeah, well, you had in your poll, you had 2 options of keeping Smith and 2 options of not keeping Smith, and he got 11% between the 2 options. 4% of keeping him and dumping Koski, and 7% of keeping both. And the other 2 options both involved replacing Smith or both, and that was like 88+%. So that's the people have spoken in that respect. Not that polls are infallible by any means, but I've personally voted with the majority group as well. Keep Koskinen. That's just a realistic state of affairs. That they're kind of stuck with him with the contract that Peter Chiarelli signed him to in his last act. But the case can be made, other than he didn't have the games played of a starter, but his stats were certainly pretty good, and he performed not bad. You could say in the playoffs he didn't come up as big as he is. And, leaving the short side open when you're 6'7" is a little bit tough, but anyway, I just don't see any realistic way of moving him unless you're moving him for another big ticket goalie. And that's a trade that would have to make sense for the other team as well. And I just don't know, how.
Like Tuka Rask, you trade him for Tuka Rask.
I threw that out in speculation yesterday on Twitter, and I got taken to task by the Twitter police for my first speculative trade suggestion in about 5 years. That I don't think Tuka Rask is coming back to Boston, was my point. So maybe now is the time to ask about that guy. Maybe you don't like what you hear when you do ask. Maybe he's not coming back at all, but maybe you should ask.
It was an excellent question to ask, actually. I mean, Kevin Paul DuPont, who's the dean of hockey writers in Boston, right. He's saying he doesn't think Rask is coming back. Why wouldn't you ask that? Why wouldn't you speculate on that? And you're right. Like, this would have to be a money for money trade.
Right. The only way Boston, you can afford Rask is.
I think there's a bit of a faction of Oilers fans who don't like Koskinen, maybe because of his contract, and just think, oh, that's crazy to think that Boston might want a goalie with a .917 save percentage. But Tuka Rask's save percentage over the last 5 or 6 years has been around .917. I mean, it's like on average. So it's not. This is actually that's an interesting idea, and it's the kind of interesting idea that Ken Holland should definitely be exploring. So I'm giving you a thumbs up on that tweet, Bruce, and to hell with the Twitter police.
Just the Twitter police idea, why not think about it, right? I mean, there's sometimes there's volatile situations somewhere else that can be taken advantage of. And I mean, Tuka Rask is a pretty high-profile version of that, but I don't think he's coming back to Boston. And there's a pretty good chance he's done with the NHL, and he may just decide that he's going to play it out in Finland or SHL or something. Or I mean, he's made a huge pile of money, and clearly he's now at the point where his loyalties got a little bit divided in the playoffs, and he's really gotten raked over the coals. I'm not entirely sure he deserved it, but it is a strange situation that he came back, did play, and then left. But I think the way I looked at it is that when it came to decision point, he was at a point where he was maybe thinking to himself, would I rather lose this series and go home than win it and stay around for another 2 weeks or 2 months? And as soon as he started asking that question, he might be thinking, the team might be better just going with the guy who's all in, and that's not me. And and it's uh, it's hard to
That's a
frame
really
it
good
as a
point,
team
Bruce.
first. But I mean, if that's the way that he's thinking, maybe he is just better off to get the heck out of there.
Avon calling.
Another
Your facial creams are here, Bruce.
That's the phone book. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my hair products.
Your moose. The only moose you know is Moose Dupont. All right. Uh, that's it. We of course we can't read Rask's mind. We do not know, and we don't know anything. His comment seemed fairly cryptic about why he was leaving. To me, like and I'm just so I'm not going to say anything about it. People have I guess they have this. Anyone can leave their job at any time based on the terms and conditions, and whether he let down the team or not, I'll leave that to Boston Bruins fans. I know how I would feel as listen, if I'm completely honest, Bruce,
Oh,
if I was an Oilers fan and a key player on my team left in the middle of the playoffs, I would probably have that ticked off reaction that some people are having as
it's
well,
understandable.
while trying to understand it and put everything in perspective as well. But I understand kind of the knee-jerk ticked off response as well, so I'm not going to.
Which is the only reason why I think he might be on the block is because he will have fallen out of favor with a lot of Boston fans, and they
Oh,
may
and
just
the
decide to.
teammates,
And yeah,
coaches.
well, the teammates are saying the right things anyway. I think they might move on from him. So anyway,
Yeah.
enough said about that. He had a 929 save percentage this year, and he's had a 922 career save percentage. Like this is an elite level goaltender. It would be a step up, but he's only got 1 year to go, and he's got 7 million on his contract. So even if you move Koskinen, you're paying an extra 2.5 million next year. So it's not easily
There's
done.
there's other possibilities. Let's go through them, okay?
Sure.
I identified a number of them, and I didn't really focus on Rask. I think you should write a
Right.
post tonight about Rask. I think that's a very interesting idea. You should explore what, dig into it, and see if there's an air of reality to it, because I think it's a great suggestion. So I think the most likely candidates, Bruce, I narrowed it down to a group of UFAs and a couple RFAs. And so if we're to put them into groups, there's kind of the older guys who are either the backup goalie most of the year or part of the year for their team, and their team has another good goalie. So there's Anton Huboden and Thomas Greiss.
Hmm.
Huboden's in Dallas. He's currently the starting goalie in the playoffs for Dallas on a winning team right now in the playoffs. But he's 34, and Ben Bishop is signed for 3 more years at $5 million per, almost $4.9 million per, and had a 920 save percentage this year. So Dallas had the
930.
luck. Not, I thought it was
930.
920.
Best in the
No,
league.
that's Huboden. That's Huboden. I'm
Oh,
talking about Bishop.
oh,
Bishop
okay.
had
Sorry.
920. So
Okay.
Huboden had a 930. And so you can see why they're thinking, let's go to Huboden in the playoffs and go
Which
with him.
third?
But if Huboden wants to get paid more, and if he wants to be more chance of being the starting goalie, he may pick elsewhere. Greiss is in the same boat. He's not starting. Semyon Varlamov is. Varlamov signed long term on a big deal. Greiss, again, if he wants to be the starter, wants more pay. He had a 913 save percentage. He's been a good goalie 4 out of the 5 last seasons. Both those guys are 34. So those are two guys. Do you have any thoughts on those two?
Yeah, well, Hudobin, I mean, Dallas is paying between the two goalies 7.4 million. So that's not too unrealistic. Like I always put for goalies, 10% of the salary cap because 2 out of your 20 guys, on
So
on
8 million.
your active roster. So 8 or 9 or 10%
Yeah.
is reasonable for your goalies. You don't want to be paying two $5 million guys, but you can afford a 5 and a 2.5. And I don't know how much more Hudobin likes. I suspect he's pretty happy with the situation in Dallas. He has been an excellent backup goalie for a number of teams over the years.
Yeah.
But he, this year he played 30 games. And maybe that's what you want. And Edmonton is a guy, you don't need a guy who's going to play 60 games because you got Koskinen. On the other hand, you can't be affording a second $4.5 or $5 million goalie to go with Koskinen. So he's in the range, but I anticipate Dallas will re-sign him and he'll get a raise, but not a big raise. I mean, he's 34 years old, but he's. I remember writing about him as a possible get maybe 5 summers ago when we were talking about goaltending, as we do every summer, and he's gone on to play well with good teams, and that's his MO. He's only once played 41 games as his career high, so he's a he's a number two right now. He's playing because Ben Bishop is unavailable,
Oh, is
unfit
that
to
right?
play. Yeah,
Oh, there you go.
so
I
we
didn't
don't
even know
know.
that.
But nice backup option to have when your starter is down. A lot of teams would be hung out to dry if they lost their starter in the playoffs, but Dallas is not one of those teams.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a quick look at Dallas's cap situation for this coming year. It's hard to tell. We got a lot of money tied up in a lot of big players. So, Grice, Bruce, any thoughts on him?
I've always kind of liked him, and he's the same kind of thing as he's established himself as a career veteran backup goalie, and again, that's kind of what Oilers are looking for. This year he was 913, so a little above average, but that's playing on a very strong defensive team run by Barry Trotz. And the Oilers, I don't think, classify yet. I mean, it's hard to translate how an Islanders goalie would do playing for the Oilers because the teams are so different. But he is. Let me bring him up here. How old is he? 34, and he's played 282 games at that advanced age, and he was a starter. He played 51 games one year. That was his top, but he's posted better stats when he's been a backup. But he's a decent option. I would say a cut above Mike Smith at this point, but the same class of goalie that could push Koskinen and play a bunch of games, but not be expected to move in and take over as the number one guy.
And they're not
decent.
Yeah, they're not looking for they really believe in alternating goalies now, and I think this is kind of a new thinking in the NHL. Like the days of the goalie playing 60, 65 games is going to be less common than it was in the past, I believe. And Grice he has been the starter before 1 or 2 years.
We're back in 1972 again, David. 50-50.
Yeah, Gary Smith and Tony Esposito. That's the model. Mandatory 1970s goalie reference.
Yeah,
Jacques
Ed Jacquemin and Gilles Villemure.
Oh, I was about to say that. Gilles Gilbert and Jerry Cheevers. Did they play together? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I believe so. Although Cheevers went to the WHA for quite a while. Jerry Cheevers and Ed Johnston split the duties down the middle when they won the Stanley Cup in '72.
Wow. Dallas is right up against the cap, so maybe I agree with you. Who Bowden? I see them probably, especially him playing in the playoffs and doing well. I can see them finding a way to try to get him. But I think so. If I had to pick the two most likely guys to come in, I'm going with Grice or Matt Murray from Pittsburgh. Okay. So Pittsburgh has two goalies. They're both RFAs, Murray and Tristan Jarry. Tristan Jarry really outplayed Matt Murray this year. Considerably. Matt Murray had an .898 save percentage, I believe, and I think Jarry was .920. Matt Murray, I think the year before, though, had a .918 save percentage. So apparently he had some injury issues this year. He has helped his team win two Stanley Cups. He is playoff proven. That goes a long way in convincing a GM that he's worth having on your team. Somebody who can come through in the playoffs like that. Pittsburgh is apparently looking, Bob Stauffer keeps talking about how Pittsburgh is looking to shed salary, Bruce, and have less salary on that roster and not be a cap team, like pays $75 million, not $80 million. So I could see, and there's also the expansion draft coming up here. So I see, the Dan Kingerski of a Pittsburgh Hockey Now wrote a really interesting article about Matt Murray's value. He pegged his value as a second-round draft pick and maybe a favor or a lower-level prospect, which is not a high price to pay, even though the Oilers don't have a second-round draft pick right now. But they have, Jesse Puljujärvi,
Hmm.
who could be probably had for cheap, who would probably love to go to Pittsburgh. They have Chris Russell, who's an interesting player in that he's got a $4 million cap hit, but if you're not up against the cap, it doesn't matter so much. And he only gets paid $1.5 million next year. So a team looking for an NHL defenseman, someone who can defend, kill penalties, play bottom pairing, maybe move up into your top pairings if need be, and is looking for to shed salary and still get a good player. Chris Russell's an interesting player for some teams like that. So Matt Murray, Bruce, is I would not at all be surprised to see him end up here.
Yeah, he have to be a little expensive, eh? I mean, his platform, as I believe I saw, is 3.75 million,
Yes.
and he's an RFA. So I mean, that's sort of the qualifying offer level. And you would think that, with the Stanley Cups and so on in his resume, he'd probably be looking for a raise. That said, coming off an 8.99
Yeah.
season, that kind of skewers his bargaining power to some extent. But I mean, he's still got a lot of cachet with those two cup rings, and I mean, he was the goalie in both of those. But yeah, he had a $3.75 million 3-year deal that he signed after the second of those two cups, and then his performance since then has been not as strong. 907, 919, 899, and in the playoffs 908, 906, 914. So not quite the 923 and 937 he put up in those two cup runs. He's been average in the playoffs. And the other issue here, which is overarching, which applies to Pittsburgh and quite a few other teams, is that with expansion coming up, they can only protect one goalie. So the teams that do have sort of two legitimately decent goalies are facing the prospect of losing one of them to Seattle Kraken in a year's time. And so some teams will be positioning themselves to trade out a goalie, or trade out a goalie, and so that they're not going to lose them for nothing. So there's a couple of teams to look at there. I think especially New York Rangers and Columbus Blue Jackets that have two just emerging goalies in each case, and they would be prime targets for Seattle, and so they might be looking to move on, and they can trade right up to the deadline. But goalies don't often, Robin Leonard exception, goalies don't often get moved at the deadline. Goalie moves generally get made in the off season, so teams are settled in net. So those might be two teams and there'll be a lot of inquiries, and the price might be too high, and the contracts in question might be costly. So, but it's at least an avenue for investigation. That, for instance, Columbus, they got Joonas Korpisalo and Elvis Merzlikins. You talk about Elvis left the building. Well, that Elvis might be leaving that building, and They just signed him to an extension of $4 million, so he's not. He's not
Do they have to
free.
protect both those guys? Is
They
Merzlikins?
can't protect. They can't protect them both. So, and they're
What
both
is
26 years
he's not
old,
on?
and they're
Oh,
on
okay.
their second
They're
contracts,
not.
and
Okay,
they're,
gotcha.
as far as I know, I mean, I think there's one extra year for goalies, but as far as I know, the Columbus situation is both of them are up for grabs. Just like Pittsburgh with Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry, or New York Rangers with Shesterkin and Georgiev. That maybe those teams will be looking to change out one of those goaltending assets for something else that they can solve a problem at a different position and maybe protect. So,
Yeah. I'm going to go full Gene Principe here, Bruce, on you, and I'm going to suggest that those teams don't have to get cracking on making a trade. Because you can wait till after next season. It doesn't even have to be at the deadline. You can just wait to before the expansion draft, can you not? And then
I'm
you
trying
could
to
make a
remember how
trade.
that worked, and yeah, that's a good question. It seems to me there was a certain point where you just couldn't do anymore because they didn't want teams pulling a bunch of shenanigans before Vegas got their chance to draft. But it's a few years ago now, and I don't have a real clear recollection on it. Sorry.
It'd be interesting because I haven't done the next step in figuring out this whole market is figuring out which teams this year need another goalie, need a 1 or a 1A goalie. And there might not be that many, right? Because of contracts. Like Florida, for instance, might want another goalie, but they just signed Bobrovsky, right? So they've got him. And there's other teams like that have the goalie. And so it's a pretty good time to get another goalie, I think. And that's the other thing here, because I hadn't even thought of Columbus or St. Louis too, with Billington and Jake Allen.
Billington and Allen, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a
And
number
Allen's
of teams.
pretty expensive, but
he's 4.35 million.
So
I think the Oilers could stretch to about 4 million in there, and if you can stretch to 4 million, if it's your top priority, I think it's a pretty big priority, Bruce, because I think the answer on defense isn't to add an expensive player. It's to shed contracts and go with younger guys on defense. So you solve that problem in that way if you can. The answer at forward and maybe third line center, although honestly, I think Gaetan Haas might be your third line center, and I know that sounds like crazy talk to some people, but he's fast and he's a good hockey player and he's defensively responsible. But I think the answer at forward for McDavid's wing might not be as expensive as people think. It could be Athanasio or Nygaard, or both of them on the fastest line that we've ever seen in NHL history. It could be something like that. That's not that expensive. So I think that the Oilers may be able to go as high as, let's say, 4.5 on another goalie. And frankly, Bruce, to me, that's where I would spend my money this year on the Edmonton Oilers. I want to see them have two really good bets in net. I think Koskinen has gone from being a 50-50 bet to being better than that. He's a pretty good bet to have a decent year next year, based on everything we've seen from him. And I'd like to see another goalie who's a pretty good bet to have a pretty good year, rather than just a 50-50 bet. So I hope that they do spend the money, and I hope that they do bring someone in. Robin Lehner is another. He's going to be probably the big UFA out there, unless Vegas signs him. And I guess if they don't, could you trade for Marc-Andre Fleury? Would you want to? I haven't looked up his numbers recently. But...
7 million, 2 more years, I believe. It's 7 million. And so if they keep Lehner, which I mean they're using Lehner, but there would be a very narrow market in which to move Marc-Andre Fleury at his age and cap hit. I mean, he's getting paid the same as Rask, but with 2 years, I think, to run instead of 1, as I looked it up yesterday.
905 save percentage, 35 years old, $7 million. No, thank you.
So then, of course, there's Frederick Anderson, who's falling out of favor in Toronto, who's got 1 year left at $5 million. But I'm not sure where the trade is, and the reason that he's fallen out of favor in Toronto is the same kind of thing that we're hearing Oilers fans say, which is letting in goals at bad times in the playoffs. And those are the kind of things that stick when he got beaten on a shot from the goal line, trailing 1-0 in the third period of the deciding game. That made it 2-0. They were dead right then and there, because they were never going to score 2 in that game the way Korpisalo was playing. That was a game, it was like Oilers' last game, where you have to match the other goalie because he's on fire. Well, your guy needs to be too, and maybe the expectation set too high, but I think you do expect him to make the routine save.
I want a goalie for the Oilers who's good enough that if you're in a 5-game series next year for whatever reason, and you're in game 4, and the other goalie is coming off an iffy game, that you can start that goalie, no questions asked. That's the goalie I want, Bruce. And they by their own actions, they didn't think Mike Smith was that goalie. So you need someone who's good enough to be that goalie. And now maybe if they'd started Mike Smith, he would have proven us all, he would have shown everybody that he still is that goalie. I thought
Smith was going to be the choice. I really did, and I thought Tippett was between a rock and a hard place at that point, and you could have rolled the dice with Smith, and you could have he could have rolled 7-11 or doubles, but there was every chance that he wouldn't, and there was no room for error, as we know.
Yeah. God, I just thinking of the third periods in game 3 and 4. It just flashed into my head, those horrible moments in Oilers history.
Mhm.
Uh, all right. Have we covered it, Bruce? Is anything else? Any other goalies out there?
The trade route is the other option. I keep mentioning this name, Antti Ranta, as a guy on another team who, maybe that's a deal for Chris Russell, right? Or where you trade cap hit for cap hit, but you bring in
Yeah.
what you need, which is a solid number two, and maybe what the other team needs is real cash savings, which is what they would achieve out of a trade like that. So there's, the trade route is a very realistic option at this point in time. But that's I don't think the Oilers are in a place where they can afford the top of the line goalies like Robin Lehner. I don't think they could afford him on free agent market, so they're going to have to improvise somehow.
Ranta is only 30, and he had a 921 save percentage this year, 906 the year before, 930 the year before that, 922 the year before that, 919 the year before that. Man, that's a very
Some
tempting
health
kind of.
issues, but he's a real good stopper. He was Lundqvist's backup in New York after Talbot, right after when they traded Talbot to Edmonton. Ranta got promoted there, and I've kind of been tracking him for a while. So I watched him in international play, but he's an interesting player, and he would fit the bill of what they need for 1 year as long as he can stay healthy, which is a bit of an issue with that guy.
And they have three goalies there, right? They've got Aiden Hill with
Mm-hmm.
and Darcy Kemper and him.
Darcy Kemp.
So you can't keep all of them because if you send Hill down, unless he's on his ELC, I'm not sure you expose him to waivers. So yeah, lots. I think there's lots of options, and if Holland's going to take his time here, that's good. I don't think there's any need to rush because there's lots of goalies who are similar value, similar kind of bet. So why rush? Why be the first to charge in there and sign someone to a big Bob Bobrovsky of a contract and live to regret it? Um, the only goal I see maybe getting that, well, Markstrom and Leonard um, might get that kind of pay. What about Braden Holtby? He's the final one that was on that I looked into. He had a pretty iffy year. There's a young goalie there in
So,
Samsonov in Washington who's ready to go. Although Holtby is starting in the playoffs, I'm not sure if Samsonov's hurt, but Holtby has been the starter, and they,
yes.
they won last night. And so, what do you think of him? He's 30 years old. He could. I don't see him getting top dollar, Bruce.
Well, he's got the same, he's got the Stanley Cup resume, right?
Yeah,
And he was well thought of for a long time, but really, um, he was a 920 goalie for the first 7 years of his career, pretty much
yeah.
every year. And then the last 3 years, 907, 911, 897 this year.
Oh,
And so, that's, uh, and his goals against average has soared to, over 3 goals per game. So nothing there that screams special. And yet there are some people out there that think he's a target for Ken Holland and are looking at him getting, a $6 or even $7 million cap hit, which I just don't see how they do
oh,
that.
come on.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pessimists out there too. Let's remember that. A lot of people have seen how things go for the Oilers and expect the worst. And I mean, they're not
Oh,
wrong in one sense, but I
is
don't
that the
see
position
seven
of the
million
is
for
that what
Braden Holtby.
the fearful, not the faithful, are thinking in terms of the Oilers fearful are thinking Holland might do? I don't. I mean, listen, okay, we can all admit the Cassian contract was suboptimal, but
Right.
he's come on, Braden Holtby's not getting like who's going to be splurging on a goalie? Like, can Leonard even take advantage? Is there a team out there with that amount of cap space who can make room for Leonard? It's let's say Leonard wants
Small
six
number.
6 million a year. Okay, let's pretend that. I don't
Yep.
know what he's going to get. He got 5 million this year. He's had another good year. He's playing well in the playoffs. So let's say he goes up to 6.5. Who can afford that? Who's in need of a goalie who can also afford that? It's pretty unless Tuka Rask retires in Boston, then suddenly has a $7 million hole
Right.
um, in its roster. I don't I don't know. It's going to be a very different and interesting market, isn't it, this year?
It's
And
a
that's
tough
what
summer.
none of us have got our heads around that. I don't think. something to
It's a
think
tough
about.
summer for free agents, period, be they goalies or position players. It's
Yeah.
the market that they're entering with the flat cap and all the uncertainty. So, I mean, the, the numbers that you might set as an expected ask for a player probably don't apply for free agents this summer. And you're going to see guys signed for less than you normally would, and it's just going to be driven by the flat cap.
The question is, I guess that we can take a few guesses. It's how big is the discount going to be? Is it going to be mind-boggling,
Mm-hmm.
or is it going to be um, kind of expected? Kind of, and what this comes down to is there's a few unknowns. We don't know how many NHL owners are absolutely strapped for cash, and who have been just beat up
Yeah.
one side and down the other by this COVID-19 pandemic and the economic conditions flowing out of it. There could be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or half the owners who are absolutely have taken a beating and we don't even know it and are in some kind of financial trouble. And suddenly we go from a league with 1 or 2 Peter Pocklingtons to 10 or 15 who are in that really tough position. Now they're helped by the cap and they're helped by revenue sharing and all those things as well. But that could be we don't know that, Bruce, and that could be a huge factor.
Well, revenue sharing, we don't know what kind of revenue there's going to be to share. We don't know
Yeah.
when the games will start. We don't know how big the crowds will be. We don't know how many people will be able to afford to renew their tickets at this point with all the uncertainty and job losses and everything else. Like the
Uh,
whole thing is a huge schmozzle. Like the big overarching big picture is a scary mess. And underneath it, we're trying to sort of find normalcy, and it's it's pretty hard to pin anything down. I mean, can you say with certainty that Daryl Cates is in great financial
no,
shape? I can't.
no, but we haven't heard any signals. So there's a smoke signal out of Pittsburgh, let's say,
Hmm.
that they're looking to spend less money, right? So that's the kind of thing. That was the first time I've heard that. So that's the kind of thing we're going to hear more and more and more. It's going to be put out there in the media like, oh, well, a team is looking to spend. They're not looking to be a cap team this year. They're looking to economize and do just as well with 10% less, which was the old EIG philosophy, right?
Hmm.
Spend 10% less than the other guys, and just by your sheer smart and will and determination, you're able to compete with them. And it actually worked fairly well for the EIG, to give them credit. But we might start to hear that more as a norm. What we have seen, Bruce, is baseball teams are traveling around and playing games.
Fun
Soccer
game.
teams, football teams, European football teams are traveling around and playing games. So for the regular season, I can't imagine they're going to be in a bubble. Um, Although who knows? Maybe you're going to have um, mini bubbles where for a month, let's say 8 teams go to one destination and they play each other a whole hell of a lot in that 1 month, and
Hmm.
then there's maybe a week cooling off period,
Yeah.
and then they go to the next. Then they split it all up and they go to a different bubble. Like, who knows what it's going to be? It depends because no one knows how this outbreak is going to go in the next. It could just be terrible. Things could get a lot worse in the next uh, 2 or 3 months in North America and other northern climates, or this could fade, and we just don't know the answer. We have no idea. So who knows?
Yep.
Best to wait, I think, for
Yeah,
Ken
well, that's
Holland.
right. So, and I mean, just to get back briefly to your point about the players going in, the agents, how big of a bath will players be expected to take? Well, the agents are going to be saying, well, we know that whatever we sign for, we're going to be given 10% of it back in 2020, 21, and we know that there's going to be a clawback of probably 20% of escrow. So we're already getting 70% of whatever dollar figure that we signed for. You can't expect us to sign for half of the player's former value and then lose 30% off of that. So, there's going to be a lot of infighting, I suspect, over how to even set those values.
Excellent point, and this is why I think you wait. This is
Hmm.
why I think the smart GM. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is my speculation of the moment, and people can write their comments in. But I just think there's going to be a huge amount of expectation adjustment of people having to get their heads around like, hey, this isn't what it was before at all. And the economic reality of this has to sink in for the agents and for the players. And it's going to, the GMs are going to start to get their budgets, right? But they don't even have that yet. They don't know. And so they're in, like, there's the cap, but then there's also the internal budget. How much revenue does that owner have? How much is he going to get? And if there's no home games, how many of them are going to be willing to spend 20 or 30 million dollars of their own on their pet project that they're going to just throw out the window on player salaries this year because they're such hockey fans? How many of these guys get?
How can
Yeah.
it cover it all?
So what owners are going to be able or willing to take that kind of hit? And we don't know about Daryl Cates in Edmonton. Maybe Ken Holland isn't. Maybe Daryl Cates doesn't even know at this point. So I think the smart GM will wait for expectations and the harsh reality to sink in with many players. And when you start to get desperate players, that's when you start to get really good deals for the teams. And, we saw that with Riley Sheahan, Chris Russell in recent years, where they both signed, when they came to the team, 1-year deals below market value, I think, for both players. Alex Chason, first time around, right? So
the first year they signed.
Wait for that kind of deal to come your way, and I think it will be coming your way, because the opposite end of that was the Zach Kassian deal signed just before this whole thing started, where you got bonked on the noggin, and you've now paid probably twice what you would have paid in both term and cap hit for Zach Kassian, because you moved fast. Now I'm not criticizing Ken Holland for moving fast, because who knew? No one, not one person on Twitter even brought up, hey, that Zach Kassian contract is way too much because the COVID's going to hit. So not one person said it at the time.
What I did hear was that I'd rather have a hungry Kassian in the playoffs.
Yes, there was criticism of the deal. There was other types of criticism of the deal, and that's fair. But there wasn't the COVID criticism. So, but there was lots of criticism of the deal at the time. Probably, a third of the fans were probably making fairly reasonable critiques. Maybe even half of the fans reasonable critiques of that deal. So, alrighty. Anything else on the goalies, Bruce? Or are we done?
Other than I wouldn't be waiting for your classic September pre-training PTO style contract to sign a goalie.
No,
maybe position player. So that is something they'll need to resolve in good time. But I agree, not rushing. I mean, just taking stock, and I think that's what Holland and company are doing now and will be doing for much of the playoffs. So
yeah. And things will change based on the play of these various players in the playoffs. I guess my point is the goaltending thing is probably not something that you try to fix before free agency or first or second day of free agency. It's like a third to 10th day of free agency move that you make. You see what's left. You see
you don't go and sign Jonas Gustafsson on July 1st like the Oilers did that one year.
Goose? No, you don't. And maybe that was the right. I don't know. Was that the right move? Like, depends on the market. Some years it seems like there's like what it always seems in the past, Bruce. Like whatever the Oilers most needed was in short supply, and whatever the Oilers had to trade, there was lots of that out there. Like you couldn't get full value for your wingers
out there.
Yeah, you couldn't get full. So you had to give up Taylor Hall for Adam Larson, right? Because you couldn't get, like, who had a defenseman to trade that year? Nobody. But this year there does seem to be a number of goalie options, for both because of COVID, the cap, expansion, all these things have come together. So for that particular market, this is a good year to get a goalie, and I think they're going to get another goalie because of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure that that majority position, keep Koskinen, move on from Mike Smith, is a highly likely scenario, and so it's just a matter of what do you find at what price point, and what kind of term, so on. I mean, the thing is, if they got a goalie that emerges as number one, they can expose Koskinen to Seattle, and it's probably not the end of the world, right?
Well, that's it. Like, you just go with who's ever best, because by then you have one more year of Skinner. You've had a year of Rodrigue. Skinner may well be ready to be an NHL number 2 goalie after one more year, wherever he's going to play, if he plays, kind of thing. Okay. Thanks for talking, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.